Welcome to Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. The essence of horror stories lies in their ability to tap into our deepest fears, both real and imagined. They create a sense of unease by distorting the familiar, turning safe places into traps and trusted people into threats. Horror plays with the unknown, the unseen, and the uncontrollable, forcing us to confront what we try to bury. Fear of death, isolation, madness, or the monsters within ourselves. At their core, great horror stories don't just scare us. They reflect something true about the human condition, making us question our reality long after the story ends, as we shall see in tonight's collection of stories. Now, as ever before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's tales may contain strong language as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then let's begin.
Jack didn't bother to brush the dirt off his rotten suit. Well, some say cleanliness is next to godliness, but he figured the big man upstairs, or even the head honcho of hell, didn't factor into his current situation. There was a spent bullet rattling around in his empty skull, after all, and he couldn't recall ever seeing anything resembling a tunnel of light, or even a sucking pit blacker than night. Besides that, digging from the wrong end of a grave was tiring work, and he still had more to do that night. With empty eye sockets, he spotted the handle of a shovel partially hidden under dead and decaying leaves. He assumed whoever buried him there had accidentally left it behind, thus marking the spot where his remains had been hidden. Not bothering to consider the irony of it all, he let out a breathless sigh of relief, simply glad he didn't have to dig any more with his hands. The how and why of his resurrection was a mystery to him, but somehow he knew what had to be done and where he had to go. He only hoped he could hold together long enough to complete his task. With limbs lacking connective tissue or ligaments to hold them together, he leaned down and picked up the rusty tool. Despite the absence of muscle tissue, he gripped its handle tightly and rested its long wooden shaft upon his bony shoulder. Defying more than a few natural laws, he did all these things and then turned away, shambling through the woods toward his final destination. He had a long road to travel, and another grave to dig that night. He clumsily shuffled his way through the overgrown thicket on the edge of the woods, past a dead-end sign, and headed directly up the center of May Street. Children, dressed in all manner of colorful costumes, walked along the sidewalks. Plenty of them gawked at the animated corpse of Jack Marlin, but no one saw his appearance as the coming of the zombie apocalypse. In fact, he fit in quite well with all the other ghoulish creatures roaming the streets that night. There really was no better night for his return topside. After all, pretty much anything goes on the 31st of October. One kid made up to look like a hamburger yelled out to him, "Oi, super scary costume, Mr. Bickle. You've really outdone yourself this year." Well, Jack didn't know who Mr. Bickle was, but he took the misplaced compliment as a sign he'd see little resistance on his trek through town. If it weren't for his jawbone lying somewhere back in the thicket, he might have responded with a "Right back at you, kid." Instead, he ignored the boy and continued his slow, arduous walk down the street. He figured it was probably for the best he didn't try to speak. None of the trick-or-treaters seemed daunted by the thing held together with nothing more than filthy, rotten clothes and a will stronger than death itself. But even a single guttural grunt or growl might have inspired unwanted scrutiny. And the last thing he needed was an angry mob intent on doing some zombie bashing. By the time he reached the opposite end of May Street, the sidewalks were vacant, and most front doors were illuminated only by moonlight. Turning left, he took to the sidewalk to avoid attracting too much attention. The next few hours crawled by at a pace matching his own sluggish stride. Other than a few blaring car horns and one inaudible slur, he walked along unnoticed and undeterred. Crossing the street toward the end of his journey, he tripped on the curb and did a faceplant on the sidewalk. As he rose to his feet, something the size of a fist slipped out of his ragged clothing and burst open on the cement. Thinking another part of him had fallen off, he looked down to see if it could be salvaged. Lying there on the sidewalk was a rotten piece of cloth surrounded by charred bits of bone. He only had to compare them to his own hands to confirm They were broken finger bones. The knuckles, being the only bits not touched by fire, made him think of popcorn for some strange reason. A phantom pain where his stomach used to be stopped him short of reminiscing about his past life. With a swing of his shovel, he scattered the bones, not giving 1 second to consider the bones' significance. He then moved on toward his destination. A shaggy dog with dirty, matted fur came upon him about a block from his destination. It followed along behind him, probably hoping there was still some marrow left in his bones. He shooed it away with the business end of his shovel when it got too close for comfort. Oh, if anyone's burying anything tonight, Fido, it sure as hell ain't gonna be you. The thought made him chuckle inwardly as he came upon a railroad crossing. Walking over the tracks brought up memories of his wife. She always crossed her fingers when passing over train tracks. She insisted he do it too, but he never played along. In fact, he always chided her for being so superstitious. Suddenly overwhelmed with regret, he did it for her then, and lost a finger for his efforts. Not bothering to pick it up, he continued on. For the second time that night, he felt a strange tingling in his bones. Shrugging off the doubt welling up inside, he quickened his pace, certain that whatever was holding him together had an expiration date. He stopped for a moment when he came to the edge of the cemetery and gazed out over the landscape. He wasn't present when he was interred there. Well, only in the way that counts, but somehow he knew on the other side of the property was an empty coffin and a headstone with his name on it. And right beside it was where his wife rested. She was alive the last time he'd seen her, but in the same mysterious way that he knew where his grave was, he also knew she was dead as well. Walking amongst the grave markers and headstones gave him a little taste of the tranquility no unmarked grave could ever give him. To finally be at rest beside the woman he loved was all he wanted. He didn't know who had dug him up and buried him in the woods at the end of May Street, nor did he understand why anyone would do such a thing. He decided it didn't matter because he'd taken matters into his own hands and would finally be at peace very soon. With the shovel gripped tightly in his dead, cold hands, he stepped up to his headstone. Etched into the stone was his name, the timeline of his life, and a simple message: beloved son, father, and husband. Beside that was his wife's stone. He brushed a reddened leaf off the top of it and turned back to his plot. Time to get back to being dead and buried, he thought as he sunk the head of the shovel into the ground. He pressed it deeper with his foot and heaved out the first shovelful of dirt. As he tossed it aside, a voice broke the silence surrounding the graveyard. How exactly do you intend to pull all that dirt back when you're done? Jack spun around to discover a tall man in a plain black t-shirt and blue jeans. Not seeming the least bit shocked by the animated corpse of Jack Marlin standing before him, he exclaimed, "Ah, there's my shovel," before snatching it from Jack's hands. Without a second of hesitation, he swung the shovel around and slammed Jack in the side of the head. The dead man bellowed inhumanly as he stumbled to the side. Just as he regained his footing, the stranger swung the shovel upward, catching him square on the chin and dropping him hard onto his back. Seconds later, a boot pressed heavily on his chest. He could hear his ribs cracking as he desperately clawed the man's leg. The stranger stabbed the shovel into the ground beside the dead man's head and grabbed him by the arms. With a great heave, he tore them out of their sockets and tossed them aside. The writhing corpse of Jack Marlin let out a ghastly screech that echoed through the cemetery. The stranger grabbed the shovel and, without a second thought, drove it straight through the dead man's neck. Jack's head rolled free and settled into the divot he dug just moments before. Crouching down, the man picked up the severed head and spat in its eye socket. You don't remember me, but I wish you did. The next time you see me, it'll be like we've never met before. Well, sadly, hexes can only do so much. You're probably wondering who I am, but my name's not important. Just know I'm the great-grandson of Hilda Swanson. You at least remember her, right? She's one of the many people you swindled. Well, she has a message for you. And with all that said, he set Jack's skull on the grass and pulled a little pouch and a pack of matches from his pocket. Within the pouch was a fine red powder he poured in a circle around the skull. Jack, being the unwilling witness he was, could do nothing but watch as the man took a little sack from another pocket. He guessed what it contained seconds before the man opened it and dumped its contents onto the grass. Lying there before him were bits of yellowed finger bones. The man placed the bones around the skull with the knuckle end of each sticking outside of the red circle. Mumbling a few inaudible words, he struck a match across the top of Jack's head and dropped it onto the circle. A green flame burst to life and quickly encircled the skull of Jack Marlin. The flames rose up around him and flickered threateningly. And Jack awoke, as if from a dream. He was sitting at the desk in his office with a loaded revolver gripped tightly in his hand. A loud voice came from the other side of his office door. "I repeat, this is the police. We have a warrant for your—" The voice cut out just as an elderly woman in a long yellow dress appeared before him. Her dress flowed around her as if she were under water, but her grey and black hair didn't move an inch as she strode up to his desk. "Don't you worry about them, sugar. They ain't coming in unless you give them the go-ahead." Jack blurted out, "Who are you? What's going on?" She leaned over the desk and looked him right in the eyes. "My name's Hilda Swanson. You and me need to talk." In a flash, everything came back to him. He was reliving the last moments of his life. The woman was new, but everything else was just as it had happened before. He'd gotten off the phone with the head of security, who called up to tell him the police were heading up in the elevator to deliver a warrant for his arrest. The realization was almost too much for Jack to take in, but he eventually came to his senses. I shot myself." "That's right, sugar, but don't you fret over that just yet. Ain't nothing carved in stone that can't be undone with the right ritual." "How? This can't be real. I mean..." "Sugar, it's simpler than baking a pie. You just gotta stand up and open that door." Jack sat there, staring at the ethereal figure standing before him. "Yeah, but what would that do?" Hilda shook her head in frustration. "Seems I gotta spell it out for you. Go ahead and let them men in here so things can move along as they should have in the first place. Things should sort themselves out from there." "But I don't want to go to jail." Hilda slammed her hands down on the expensive mahogany desk. "Oh, you damn coward. You'd rather leave this mess for your family to clean up?" "Yeah, I guess you would. It's what you done before, so go on then. What you waiting for? Go ahead, put that gun in your mouth and pull that trigger." Jack looked at the revolver in his hand. He wondered how things had gone so wrong. Well, convinced he'd never get caught, he dug himself deeper and deeper until he inevitably ended up where he was, deciding between whether to eat a bullet or face the shame and humiliation awaiting him on the other side of that door. Discovering a courage he didn't know he had in himself, he stood up and walked around his desk. He dropped the revolver at his feet and stepped up to the door. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the doorknob. Hilda began to cackle wildly as he swung the door open. There were no police standing there, or even his secretary typing away at her desk. Instead, all he saw was the graveyard he'd walked all night to reach. "You damn fool. Ain't nothing can undo what you done," Hilda exclaimed between bouts of insane laughter. He spun around to confront her. "I don't understand. You said..." The old woman's laughter died as a twisted grin replaced the laugh lines on her face. "Yep, I said what I said, but only so I could watch you blow your brains out again. It's the first time you ever chose option 2. It took you long enough, but it don't change nothing. You're dead, and so am I." But nothing, sugar. I died waiting for those in charge to figure out where you hid all your stolen gains, and so did plenty of other people you cheated. No doubt you locked it all away in some Swiss bank, and ain't nobody ever gonna get it. So all that leaves little old me is the chance once a year to shit in your cornflakes. Believe you me, that's just what I'm gonna do for as long as my kin keep pumping out babies and teaching them all about you. As long as they keep the tradition alive on Halloween, you ain't ever gonna rest easy beneath that fancy headstone. Utterly dumbfounded, Jack could do nothing but sputter and gasp in shock. She said he'd never rest in peace, and he believed her. He wondered in that moment how long this whole sordid affair had been playing itself out. But he didn't bother asking. He doubted she'd tell him, and he didn't think he really wanted to know. Lost in a mire of self-pity, he failed to notice Hilda step up behind him. Rising up on the balls of her feet, she leaned in close and whispered in his ear, "All that's left is you get back in the ground. See you next year, Jack." With his name barely out of her mouth, she leaned into him hard and shoved him through the door. About an hour later, Jack was once again dead to the world and settled back in his unmarked grave in the woods. Hilda's great-grandson tossed a small bag bound with a leather cord onto the corpse. Its contents crackled and hummed with the promise of dark and impossible feats. He then filled the hole. When his task was done, he laid the shovel beside the mound and covered it all with leaves and branches. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, he uttered the 5 words he ended every Halloween with. "See you next year, Jack." For as long as I can remember, my father has been irrationally afraid of mimes. I've seen him get reduced to a sweating, quivering mess at the mere sight of them. No one knew why this was, as he would always angrily brush it off whenever we questioned him about it, and he'd pretend that they didn't affect him at all. While this had become a running joke in the family, I was always curious about the reason behind this odd little quirk of his. Well, this Christmas I finally got him to spill the beans after filling his stomach with copious amounts of cake and wine. I took his story down, almost word for word, on my phone. It really is something, I can tell you that. You really want to post this on the internet? It sounds extremely unbelievable, so don't be surprised if they accuse you of making this all up, okay? Jeez, where do I even start? So, you know that I came to this country back in the early 90s, right? It was a couple of years before I met and married your mother. Times were tough for someone like me back then. I had to work 2 jobs just to put food on the table and to have a roof over my head. Even then, all I could afford was the rattiest apartment in this decrepit old building in a crime-infested shithole of a neighborhood. Well, it was so bad you couldn't get a good night's sleep without hearing at least one gunshot each night. Just a moldy, crumbling old place to live in. Now, my second job was basically a weekend thing where I worked as a bartender at the local strip club. It was called the Rear End. Fucking hilarious. Well, it was trashy and not something I'm particularly proud of. But working at a titty club sure beats sleeping on the streets, I can tell you that. What's that? Yes, your mother knows. We just don't talk about that part of my life. Don't even look at me like that. Those women were some of the bravest, most honorable people I've ever known. Anyway, my job meant that I would come back to my apartment late. 2 or 3 a.m. late. I just need you to understand how late it would usually get those nights, so you can truly appreciate just how bizarre what I saw in the elevator that day was. It was a Saturday night. I remember it well. I was exhausted and just wanted to go back to my bedroom as quickly as I could. I got into my building, lumbered over to the elevator, and saw a fucking mime waiting there for me. You know, makeup, white face, blood-red lips, striped shirt, and the whole shebang. He was holding a string tied to a balloon in one hand and waving with the other at something in the distance with this weird, lifeless smile plastered on his face. And his hand wasn't moving naturally either. It had this weird robotic, doll-like quality to it, like it was something mechanical, you know. Well, he jerked his hand left, right, just smiling at something far off into the distance behind me with these wide, unblinking eyes. Oh yes, there absolutely was just a wall behind me. Nothing else, which is what made it so creepy. I've seen all kinds of strange shit in this country, but nothing came close to seeing a mime in the elevator of my apartment building at 3:30 in the morning. Needless to say, I was thoroughly creeped out and decided to take the stairs to my apartment on the 9th floor. I didn't actually have this belly back then, and I was in decent shape, so that climb, while tiring, wasn't impossible. Sometimes I'd even climb up and down those stairs, just to exercise. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I wasn't worried about climbing up all the way to the 9th floor, so making the decision to use the stairs wasn't that difficult. I think I'd reached the 4th or 5th floor when I noticed something moving from the corner of my eye. I paused, turned around, and there he was, climbing the stairs a couple of floors below me. You ever seen those old silent films? Ever see a character tiptoe around in an exaggerated manner when they're trying to make it obvious how important silence is? That's how he was walking, with his hands balled up into fists in front of him, and climbing with these freakishly long strides, jumping over multiple steps at a time, only using the tips of his toes to pull himself up. He froze when I saw him, mid-fucking stride, like a fucking statue with one leg suspended in air as he stood precariously. I expected him to tip over and fall backwards any second, but he didn't move even an inch. It was like he'd turned to stone. Not all of him, however. He had this strange expression on his face, almost this cutesy, oh, he caught me stealing the cookies again shit, and his eyes were darting around rapidly, refusing to acknowledge my presence. I was this close to losing my shit, but I steeled my nerves and spoke up. "Hey man, cut it out." I laughed nervously. "You got me, man. Yeah, hilarious shit." I tried to rationalize it to myself, that this was nothing but a prank, or a practice performance, or something, you know. "I don't have any money, man," I added. "Look, I'm dirt poor, so yeah, you can stop now." With that, I picked up my pace and started running upstairs. My blood ran cold as I heard him start moving again, much, much faster this time, but in the exact same motion. I looked behind me again. Fuck, it was just one floor below me. Again, he turned into this living statue shit, but he was so close to me this time, I could see the whites of his eyes as he stared off into the distance. It was so bizarre. I didn't even know whether this was all malicious or not, you know. Was this mime trying to hurt me? I think knowing that he was a psycho nut would have made it easier to deal with, but this, it was irrational. The fear I felt was primal, shaking me to the core. I screamed at him. "What the fuck do you want?" I shouted at the top of my lungs, not caring who would wake up. No, hoping someone would. "Leave me alone, asshole. Just fuck off." His expression instantly changed at that. He looked sad almost, but it was frighteningly disingenuous, like he was putting on a show. His face fell and he brought his hand up to wipe off a non-existent tear. I watched in stunned silence as he then proceeded to climb the railing of the stairs and jump before I could so much as open my mouth. I screamed and quickly bent over the stairs to see what the fuck had happened. He was sprawled on the ground, 6 floors down, limbs twisted at odd angles and lying in a pool of blood. I must have spent almost a minute just staring at his lifeless body, wondering what the fuck had just happened. At the back of my mind, I knew that I had to call the cops or something, but I was far too shocked to even move. It was a tingling sensation in my spine that brought me back to reality. This strange feeling of being watched, like thousands of ants running down your back. I looked up at the stairs above me, and I kid you not, son, there he was, that fucking mime, looking at his own dead body with this shocked expression on his face. He was holding his cheeks like that scream painting, and his mouth had dropped open with his eyes threatening to pop out of his sockets. His face was just inches from mine, and I damn near peed my pants. Do you see my hands right now? Do you see how they're shaking, just thinking about that night? Imagine how terrified I must have been back then. My body had just shut down, refusing to move. And we both stood there, like statues, like some kind of living art installation. He was the one who moved. After about half a minute or so of being utterly still, His eyes moved and finally locked onto mine for the first time that night. Shivers ran down my spine as I stared into those deep pits of nothingness. But the spell was broken, and I could move my body again. I stumbled and fell backwards, but quickly scampered onto my feet and ran. And kept running until I left the building, not bothering whether I was still being followed and doing my hardest to keep away from the body lying on the ground floor. I stayed awake that whole night, grabbing a coffee at the first cafe that opened at the crack of dawn. Of course, I anonymously called the cops from a payphone in the morning, and of course there was no body in the building when the cops later showed up. Now, I'm not a very religious man, but I knew that shit was not something logic could explain. Well, for the next week I stayed away from my apartment as much as I could, only going there to shower and change my clothes, spending the nights at friends' places and just making the weakest excuses imaginable. No, I didn't tell anyone. Are you crazy? Who would fucking believe me? No, there were no CCTVs in that building. Poverty is freaking cruel, son. I could no longer impose myself on my friends, and I didn't want to go to the homeless shelter. So I decided to go back to sleeping in my apartment. I tried to fool myself into thinking that what I'd experienced wasn't real, that I'd dreamt it all up, like it was all just an hallucination. But deep within me, I knew that it was real, all of it, and that it would probably happen again. A feeling of tremendous dread washed over me when I stood outside my building 8 nights after I'd first run into that mime. It was again pretty freaking late, around the same time when I'd run into him the last time. With a heavy heart, I trudged over to the elevator, trying to avoid thinking about the fear clutching and squeezing my heart. I couldn't even look at the spot where he'd fallen, and chose to stay the fuck away from it. The elevator opened with a soft ding, and I breathed a sigh of relief to see that it was empty. Why didn't I just take the stairs? Hell fucking no. Too much trauma associated with that place. Better to be cramped inside a fast-moving elevator than risk climbing the stairs and meeting the suicidal mind from hell. I guess I should be thankful that my elevator ride was peaceful. I don't think I would have survived if he'd shown up there. A heart attack would have killed me long before he could slice me up or something. Oh, I just don't know. I fumbled with my keys, but quickly got in and locked the door behind me, kicking my shoes off, and immediately running to the comfort of my blanket, and curled up in there, trying hard to fall asleep, but staying awake like a freaking owl. So, this apartment was pretty small, right? Just 2 rooms, excluding the bathroom. So you can hear whatever's happening in any corner of the room. Get where I'm going with this? No, he wasn't in the house, but he was outside of it. I heard something rustling around outside my front door, and instinctively, I knew it was him. At first I thought I'd just stay there in my bed, but the rustling didn't stop. The fear just kept building inside me. It was becoming unbearable to just stay there. My heart was beating so fucking fast, I feared it would leap out of my mouth. Fuck it, I whispered to myself, and got up to investigate. I banged my toe against the foot of the bed and yelled, with the sounds from outside ceasing almost instantly. After controlling my pain, I walked over to the door as softly as I could, and looked through the peephole. I whimpered as my fears were confirmed. There he was, that fucking mime, just standing there with his back to the wall in front of me, at attention like some damn army cadet. I think he must have sensed me watching him, because as soon as I looked through the peephole, he bent over forwards, such that his upper body was almost parallel to the floor. His blood-red lips stretched into the most vicious smile, and he began to stare right at me. I don't know how, but he was somehow looking straight at me. No, he wasn't anywhere near the peephole, so I don't know how, but I knew he was watching me, watching him. I felt his eyes pierce my very soul, taunting me, letting me know he was playing with me, and that he could kill me whenever he wished. He brought his palms up to the side of his face, opened his mouth and began clicking his tongue. Except I never heard the clicking sound. What I heard was a knock, and my door began to shake. Knock, knock, knock. Short bursts of 3. I fell back in fear. You know, he wasn't near the door, but it still fucking knocked. I don't know what the hell was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay there even for a second. Climbed out of my window and began descending using the iron emergency exit stairs attached to the side of the building. I then heard something impossibly large and strong slam against the door to my house as I began to climb down that rickety iron staircase. My door gave in with a painfully loud crunch, and I almost fell down. Why didn't anyone come out to check what was happening? Yeah, well, people mostly minded their own business. Home invasions, murders, drug deals gone wrong. Could have been freaking anything. Not necessarily something demonic. At one point on my way down, I considered just jumping and ending my life. I was that terrified. But I shook my head and continued to fight for my survival. I was soon free. I was out of that infernal building and panting and catching my breath on the streets below. I looked back up to where my apartment was and saw him for the last time in my life. He was standing on the railing of the emergency stairs, right outside my bedroom, without a care in the world. I don't know how the fuck he balanced himself on that thing, but he stood there, staring at me with that fucked up smile on his face. He theatrically brought his hands up and clapped. I watched in terrified silence as one by one, the lights in all of the apartments began to switch on. He was there, in every apartment, at the windows that I could see. Everywhere. He was performing, if that makes any sense. In one house he was miming drinking tea, in another juggling invisible balls. Well, that was a fucked up sight to say the least. The original one continued to stare at me, and then, with another clap, switched off every light in the building and disappeared, leaving me shivering in the darkness. "Jesus Christ, Dad," I whispered. "Did that really happen?" "That's up to you," he replied. "I know what I saw." "So, did you go back there again?" I asked. He shook his head furiously. "Never in the night. Never again. I moved out as soon as I found another place." "What happened to that building?" He sighed. "Well, I kept tabs on it. The owner had to sell it to a builder. It just wasn't profitable anymore. A bunch of suicides occurred there, like 2 or 3 each year for half a decade. Bad omen all around. Well, the new owner tore it down and built a shopping mall there." "A shopping mall? Which one?" I asked. He looked at me blankly. "You don't mean..." My blood froze as the realization sunk in. "But they have a mime performance in the amphitheater every month." He nodded. "God, you're such a fool, Jason. Grow up." Putting her hair into a tight bun, my girlfriend pushed my hands away from her breasts. Her tone was dry as usual. It was why I loved her. "If I'm such a fool, what does that make you?" I winked playfully, nudging her shoulder. "Fool fucker," she responded, without missing a beat, causing us to burst into uncontrollable laughter. Jumping from the bed, I walked towards our living room, scratching myself. Grabbing for the remote, I turned on the television, flipping to the local news. Local actress Mariah Sanders has snagged the role of a lifetime, having been cast as the leading lady in Martin Scorsese's newly announced film. A grinning headshot of my girlfriend peered back at me from the TV. I stood there, speechless, wondering what the hell was going on. My girlfriend was many things, but an actress was not one of them. We'd been dating on and off for almost 4 years, and I knew her anxiety would never allow her to perform in front of the camera. She was a delicate flower, and I did my best to protect her. Mariah, I need you to come here for a second." We stood together in the living room, rewinding the news story over and over again. A quick Google search confirmed it wasn't an isolated thing. It was everywhere. Her face was plastered on TMZ, People, and every other gossip rag you can imagine. This has to be a mistake. I don't know how, but this has to be a mistake. Mariah was trembling, clearly overwhelmed with the moment. Her phone had been ringing off the hook, but she hadn't even glanced at it. This is so freaking weird. I don't understand what's happening. Soon, everyone's going to find out I'm a fraud. Oh, God. Choking back tears, she ran into the bedroom and shut the door behind her. I stood there, scrolling through endless articles and mentions on social media. As the day wore on, things got even stranger. A Wikipedia page appeared, and soon it was filled with dozens of previous TV and movie appearances. Hundreds of photos from commercials, adverts, and photo shoots began to pop up not soon after. It happened at a dizzying pace, her catalogue growing with every minute that passed. I could hear Mariah's sobs from the bedroom. I could only imagine what she was going through. It was like her life was getting rewritten by an unseen auteur, and she was powerless to stop it. Her history was being stripped from her, and we had no way of explaining it. Jason, you need to see this. Her voice quivered, barely loud enough for me to hear. Huddling around her phone screen, I watched as the news ticker flashed with a breaking headline. Deranged Chicago man kidnaps actress Mariah Sanders. Now there were two famous people in our household. Reading through a CNN article, I discovered that I was being accused of kidnapping my own girlfriend from her non-existent downtown apartment. A neighbor that was interviewed described a brazen and violent daylight kidnapping and ended by saying Mariah was the sweetest person she knew. It was terrifying. Please tell me this is the world's most elaborate prank, so I can hate you for a week and then get over it. Her eyes were filled with fear. Mariah looked at me with her beautiful, pouty lips. I wanted nothing more than to lie to her, to tell her everything was going to be okay, but all I managed to do was give a sullen shake of my head. So, this is all real? Before I could respond, the door flew open from its hinges, wood splintering everywhere. A team of SWAT officers poured in, covered in Kevlar. Grabbing Mariah by the shoulder, I pulled her into the bedroom and shut the door behind us. Somberly, I looked squarely at my love and said, "You need to yell that I have a gun, and I'm going to shoot you if they come in here. Until we can figure out what's happening, I need to escape, and to do that, I need time." Begrudgingly, Mariah told the police what I'd asked her. As I expected, they couldn't risk storming the room, so they'd stall until a negotiator arrived. "Babe, this is all so confusing, but hey, you're famous now, so it's something." We both chuckled in between cries. "I will find you, and we will figure this out, I promise. Love you forever and always." And with that, I slipped through the window and disappeared into the night. Starting over was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. But 5 years later, well, I've managed to eke out an existence. During that time, the only thing that's kept me going was Mariah. I watched her career explode from afar. She became a bigger and bigger starlet, climbing to the highest echelons of Hollywood. It was painful, but I was so proud of her accomplishments, despite everything that had transpired. Well, that was until an interview she gave 3 days ago. Dressed in a graceful white dress, she sat on a couch and spewed lies to a late-night host. "Oh, your bravery and quick thinking in the face of such danger is truly incredible. You're amazing, Mariah. Simply amazing. America wants to know, how did you do it?" "Well, Jimmy, I simply fed into his delusions. I did what I know best. I acted. He believed I was his girlfriend, and I knew if I played the part well enough, I could eventually help direct his actions. When he jumped out of that window, I broke down. I couldn't believe it was finally over. Those words grated against my heart, leaving a permanent scar. Deep sadness was replaced by an immense rage. She'd never spoken about that night before, and I believe that was to protect me. But she was so clearly deluded by her newfound fame. She'd do anything to curry favor with the masses. As I sit here, in a barely running '94 Chevy, I watch her living her new life. New man, new dog, new house. Well, history has a habit of repeating itself, no matter how hard you try and erase it. So, imagine this. You go to Olive Garden and order unlimited salad and breadsticks. The first serving comes out. You eat it. The second serving comes. You eat that as well. The third serving comes. You're starting to get full, but you eat it because, fuck it, you want to get your money's worth, right? Then the fourth serving comes. You start to eat it, but stop about a third of the way through because you're full and you can't eat anymore. As the waitress comes to give you a fifth serving, you tell her you won't eat it and that you're ready to pay. She replies, okay, with a smile, and goes to get your check, but leaves a fifth serving on your table. About 10 minutes go by and the waitress comes out with a sixth serving. You grow a little irritated and tell her you didn't want any more food. You wanted the check. Again, she smiles and says, I'll bring that right out. As she's walking away, another waitress comes out with a seventh serving of food. You're stunned at what's happening, as you now have nearly 3 full portions of uneaten food. The waitress comes back with an eighth serving and tells you the computers are down, and it might take longer than expected to process the credit card payment. She places the food on top of the food already on the table. The other patrons at the restaurant are now starting to glance at your table with confusion. And then a ninth serving comes out. At this point, you can't even see the table underneath the food, but that doesn't stop the waitress from bringing a 10th serving. You're irate now and demand her bring you your credit card back so you can leave. She says the payment is still processing, but she'll go check on it. So she comes back with a 10th serving and tells you the payment is still processing. But as you're going to have to wait, she could bring you some water. You oblige, bewildered at the pile of uneaten salad and breadsticks strewn before you, as the warm scent of garlic fills your nostrils. She comes back with an 11th serving and a glass of water. You drink the water. A 12th serving comes out. At this point, the food is piled so high you can't even see across the table anymore. 13th serving. Food starts to fall on the floor. 14th serving. People start to leave the restaurant, confused and a bit frightened at the spectacle. 15th. You start to get up to leave, but the waitress tells you it won't be much longer. I don't care, you say, your voice cracking from fear. Just let me get out of here. Oh, I'm afraid I cannot do that, sir. You must finish the unlimited salad and breadsticks you ordered. Now at this point, 30 servings lay on and around your table. A conveyor of waiters are stacking up servings one by one at the tables surrounding you. Kitchen production has reached 1 serving every 4 seconds. After 100 servings have been brought out to you, you try to make a break for the door, but you slip on a greasy breadstick and fall face first onto the floor. Oh, can I help you, sir? A worried voice asks. You look up. It's the waitress. Please, just let me go. I'll do anything, please. She smiles and replies, Oh, sir, you chose your fate already, and it only cost you $6.99. You begin to cry. You crawl to the door. It's locked. 250 servings. You begin to wet yourself. You pray, hoping for a miracle. 428 servings. Breadsticks are now shooting out of the kitchen like bullets from a submachine gun. All the waiters and waitresses have gotten on their knees and formed a circle, citing the Olive Garden Code of Conduct as smoke billows from the floor within. Salad dressing starts to fall from the ceiling. You begin to suffocate from the lettuce blocking your nasal passages. 2,564 servings. You accept your fate. Power comes in and out. A lightning storm forms outside. There are so many breadsticks in the restaurant that you're unable to see any light. The door breaks open, and food begins to pour out at the speed of sound. The road in front of the restaurant gets covered in slippery lettuce and salad dressing, causing a multi-car pileup. 6,591 servings. The earth begins to tremble. There is a power blackout. 15,477 servings. Nothing can stop the cataclysm. 61,899 servings. 422,455 servings. 10,174,592 servings. The earth begins to split. Volcanic magma makes its way to the surface. The Olive Garden employees have summoned Cthulhu. He sets fire to the continent. Salad and breadsticks completely cover the earth. Oxygen supply is cut off. Sunlight is non-existent. You're already dead. The unlimited salad and breadsticks continue to multiply, increasing the mass of the earth to unsustainable levels. Earth collapses in on itself, causing a supernova, the likes of which have never happened before. And silence.
I'm terrified of waking up at night. Not because I can't go back to sleep, but because I know that if I do, he'll be there, watching me. I first saw him a year ago, after going into a musky antique shop in town with my friends. The wrinkled, old woman shopkeeper noticed that I was a fifth wheel and that my two friends seemed to be picking on me insistently. She pulled me to the side and asked if there were any improvements I was looking to make in my life. Slightly weirded out, I told her, of course, and that I hadn't realized I was being so obvious. She went behind the counter and grabbed this vial of liquid and then told me to put some on my hands. I was definitely suspicious, but she put some on hers first, so I figured, why not? It had an odd scent to it, like a strong lavender. Ready to leave, I walked outside and was going to tell my friends about what the lady had done. Turns out they'd forgotten about me altogether and had left to the next location. No big surprise there. Then around a corner came Carrie, a girl from school I'd had a crush on for months. And to my surprise, she actually approached me to say hi. I mean, I wasn't ugly or anything, just average, I guess. But this kind of thing was definitely not normal. Sadly, I was too nervous to get her number or anything, but it still gave me a nice little boost. Then later, once I got home, my mum, who had been sick for months with a suspicious illness that doctors hadn't been able to diagnose, said she was feeling way better. This was amazing, but I still chalked it up to coincidence. That was, until I was lying in bed later and saw that I had a Facebook notification. It was from Carrie. She'd Facebook stalked me, found my profile and added me. This was getting downright suspicious. After that, her and I started texting, and things were going surprisingly well.
I also found out that I'd gotten one of the highest grades in the class on one of my math tests, which, I was terrible at math. So, I actually seriously started considering whether this oil was doing all of this. I got home later that night, and after taking a shower and going to bed, I sent out a goodnight text to Carrie. I waited a half hour or so and got no response. Considering we'd been exchanging texts like every couple of minutes for the last day, this was weird. Then I sniffed my hand and noticed that the scent was almost completely gone. Frustrated, I lay down and tried to sleep, but then began to hear the sounds of my mother coughing through the walls. Let's just say, I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I noticed that Carrie still hadn't responded. That was it. I couldn't explain why this was happening, but I definitely had to figure out how to get some more of that oil. So I showed up later at the shop that day and looked for the owner. She was in the back, organizing shelves as I approached her. I asked her if I could possibly purchase some of that oil she'd given me the other day. It works well, doesn't it? She said with a grin. She then went on to tell me that it had been given to her by a deceased husband, who was an archaeologist, and she was unsure of what it was or even where it had come from. So she told me that she could give me a little bit more, but only to be used sparingly. Otherwise, they'll take notice, she said with a sort of nervous grin. Not really understanding what she was talking about, and not really caring, I agreed. She put a single drop on my hand, and I rubbed it in thoroughly. Upon smelling it, I immediately felt a sense of calm come over me. It seemed my mind had already associated good things with the smell. I told her what had happened with my mom, and how the oil was literally changing my life. Then she said she wanted to show me something, and walked to the back of the store. But she left the vial sitting on the table, and the temptation to take it flared up inside me. It was just too easy. I started to hear her walking back from the storage area, and impulsively grabbed the vial off the counter and ran out of the store with it. Totally expecting her to come out after me, I turned back to see the store. However, she never came out. I didn't even have to run, really. I immediately poured a generous amount on my hands and rubbed it in. Not surprisingly, Carrie started returning my texts, and we actually began dating soon after. By the end of the week, it was like I was a completely transformed person. I had the girl of my dreams, and other kids were finally starting to see me differently. However, the night I first tried to kiss Carrie was when things began to take a turn for the worst. I'd walked her home, and while at her front door, I tried to kiss her, and she shied away nervously, leaving me for the night. Down and defeated, I noticed I couldn't smell any scent from the oil. So I went home and immediately rubbed a bunch of it onto my hands. Then Carrie immediately texted me, saying she was sorry and that whenever I was ready to kiss again, she was. This stuff was almost too good. After that, I just laid back in bed with a smile and dozed off for the night. I had a weird nightmare that night, though, where the wrinkled old shopkeeper was giggling and playing in the street like a little girl. Then she looked at me and started laughing hysterically, laughing until she cried even. Then her tears became blood, and I woke up. My eyes still blurry, I blinked a few times and noticed something beside my hand. It was dark, but it looked like a man or something on its hands and knees, sniffing my hand. I screamed and turned the lights on, but there was no one there. Truly horrified, I turned the TV on and put on some cartoons. I figured I must not have been fully awake yet, and somehow I'd imagined it. Later that day, I went to school and everything was pretty much normal. I was still pretty shaken up though. Carrie started texting me again, and I was excited to see her later that day. Once the school bell rang I bolted out to my bike to ride straight to her house. Then, when I got to her front door, she immediately came out, smiled and kissed me. Then she invited me in, so I went to park my bike, but when I rolled it around the house to put it up against her garage, I got the distinct feeling that someone was watching me. In the corner of my eye, I saw a man across the street, a man with a car accident face, just staring at me. But then, by the time I turned my head towards him, he was gone. I went inside and tried to forget what I'd seen, but obviously I couldn't. So the next day, I went back to the shop, and that was when things really started getting weird. The shop was closed, permanently. I got a cell phone number off Google and called the number for it, and much to my surprise, the shopkeeper actually answered. I began to apologize furiously. I told her that I would give her back the oil. The next sound I heard over the phone sent chills down my spine. She started laughing. "You've seen him, haven't you?" Too scared to respond, I just stood there on the phone. "They've taken an interest in you." "What do you mean?" I asked fearfully. "It seems they can improve your life, because they want a better story, but you must entertain them. At least, that's what my husband thought." Shivering and almost in tears, I asked if I could make it stop. She told me flat out that I needed to try and give the oil to someone else before it ran out. Then she rudely hung up the phone, and I was left staring at the empty shop. I got back home later, pulled the bottle out, and to my horror, it was empty. Clearly stressed beyond belief, I woke up again that night. My room was dark, but in the corner, I saw a figure, his arms at his sides, his head slightly tilted with a bizarre empty grin on his bag-like face, his eyes 2 little black holes. I closed my eyelids tight and pretended he wasn't there, waiting for something to happen. To my surprise, it never did. At least, not yet. I haven't really slept a full night since then. Only now, when I wake up and I know it's still nighttime, I don't open my eyes. And I know I never will again.
The following journal entries were discovered in the home of Dr. Alexander Perditus. The police officers who originally discovered it in his house after making entry were not able to decipher its contents to determine if it was the ravings of a madman or a cleverly hidden cipher. Unable to determine its purpose, it was turned over to the state officials in the hope that they could discover its meaning. Here is the diary in its original form. June 7th, 1936. Today has been a most fortuitous occasion. Yes, you may even say that it has been the greatest day in my professional life. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. I was sitting in my office at Harvard, going over student paperwork and musing about the rumblings of war over in Europe, when my good friend and fellow professor, Jack Hammerton, came into my office. He looked excited, but in a state of dishalming, and so pale of skin that I hardly recognized him at first. I proceeded to ask what was wrong, and he said nothing, only handed me a wooden box that he'd stuffed under his coat. I opened it to find a book, wrapped in what I presumed to be leather or some other type of animal hide, with the strangest markings on its cover. I am, as you already know, dear journal, a professor in ancient history and languages, but even I, using all my considerable skill, could not decipher its meaning upon first glance. Jack, who had by now sat down, told me that he had discovered this book on a recent trip to Egypt, but that it supposedly came from the Sumerian region of Iraq. I was immediately intrigued and asked him if he could elaborate on its origins, but all he could state to me was what he had already told me. I thanked him very much for the gift and had Jake follow me home so he could get some much-needed rest, and my wife, who is a nurse, could properly tend to whatever was causing such great discomfort in my friend. June 8th, 1936. A part of me wonders if Jack was on a bash and the merchant who sold this to him was just having a gas. I've been studying this for hours in my study at home, using every reference material in my library, and a few I borrowed from the university to try and make heads or tails of this. The writing style is chaotic, more like that of someone who's suffering from some form of mental illness than a dedicated scholar. The ink itself has been smeared in places and appears to be written in gold, which is preposterous. The most I've been able to make out is a single phrase: "In the abyss does the plague await. In the abyss does your fate awake." After poring through texts, the only mention I have of him is the Sumerian god Nerga, the god of plague most heavily mentioned during the reign of Hittite king Suppiluliuma, when a great plague broke out. Oh yes, I must mention Jake. His sickness appears to have gotten worse. He now spends all day in bed, sweating profusely and mumbling about a great desert and a black wave. I can only hope he gets better and pray for his quick recovery. June 16th, 1936. This confounded book is driving me mad. Every attempt I make is foiled by a later discovery. It's almost as if the Gordian knot was put into book form. I have so far deciphered 3 more phrases of this damned document, but I am only in the beginning stages of understanding this manuscript. Every phrase is again some mention of catastrophe and plague, but its language is not that of someone afraid of the impending doom. Rather, it seems as though this person is giddy with the idea of the coming pestilence. I can only surmise that this was written by a worshipper of the plague god. For example, such phrases as, "Let me be bathed in your beautiful horrors, let me shower in your misery," do indicate a love of this deity, though I must wonder who in their right mind would worship such a thing. Jake has not been recovering either. My dear friend has unfortunately started to grow wounds on his skin and boils that fester with pus. Whenever my dear wife attempts to clean these out, he reacts violently. He calls them treasures and signs of favor. I can only surmise that his sickness has broken his mind and can only have taken him from my care to be placed into the care of a hospital. I hope he recovers quickly, and I will endeavor to decipher this book that my friend has brought me at such obvious cost to himself. June 20th, 1936. I must apologize for my inconsistency in writing. I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately. Nothing serious, just a cough and a general feeling of weariness. But enough about me. I have had a breakthrough moment in the deciphering. I called upon another friend to help, and he informed me that the characters seemed to be a mix of both Sumerian and Egyptian. Oh, why did I not catch it sooner? I must be too weary and worried about my friend to have noticed. Oh, it's so simple to me now. I can feel it. This work will be the greatest in my lifetime. I know of no other document that can hope to be this mysterious and gives a peek into a culture we thought lost to the sands of time. I feel energized and must endeavor to finish this quickly. And, yes, an update on Jake. He is at the hospital now, but the doctors are unable to help him, and he is now being placed in solitary after he attacked a nurse and screamed that he must spread the love of Nergal. I find myself disturbed by this, but it must be his mind, right? I mean, he must have gotten an understanding of at least one phrase, and in his fervid state his mind grasped onto that. As that's the only thing I could see that would cause such a break in my friend's sanity. July 5th, 1936. I feel so illuminated. My mind is racing with the possibilities and the fame I shall attain. Yes, it is true that I am now confined to my bed, unable to get up due to the sickness now racking me. I've had all my research material moved into here and am now dictating this to my niece. But I have discovered so much. This book is not just the ramblings of a lunatic, but rather a path, a guidebook, if you will, to open the door to Nagar, so he may gain entry to this world. It speaks of how he only wishes to show us his love through our suffering, and that suffering brings us closer to him. His plagues are not meant to be feared, but to be embraced as his tender mercies. But surely nobody would believe this. Well, I digress. I will publish my findings as soon as I am healthy. July 15th, 1936. Jake has passed away. My wife told me when she returned from the hospital. He was discovered by a nurse on her regular checks. He was blackened, burst open upon touch, spreading pus and, most curiously, maggots everywhere. My wife is very distressed by all this, and now there are reports of sickness in the hospital. I do not see why she is distressed, for this is obviously the work of the great Nagar. He is saddened that we have grown so far from him and wishes to bring us closer so we may understand him. I have finally come to understand the truth. That sickness is not to be feared, but to be lauded, to be glorified, to be put up as an object of our worship. Nagar is to be our spiritual guide to the higher planes of understanding. I must figure out a way to spread his message to all. July 18th, 1936. I am now writing this with trembling hands. My niece was afraid to come back due to what she said was my madness. But what madness is there in knowing the truth? I know now how to summon the great Nagar into our realm. I must find those clean of his touch and sacrifice them to him by feeding them his children. My wife left today and said she would not be coming back tonight, as the sickness has consumed much of the staff and patients. She'll be staying to help them recover. How could she betray me? Going to take those who have felt his love and take that away from them? I will not stand for it. Yes, my wife must become one of the sacrifices. I must do this tomorrow, or I fear I will not have the strength. July 19th, 1936. Everything is ready. I have drawn the symbols in my own diseased sacred blood. My wife and niece, along with other random people pulled from the street, have been successfully tied down inside the symbols, and the bodies of those who have gone to be with Plague Father have been stacked inside of there as well. Tonight, at midnight, I will cut up the bodies of the glorious dead and feed them to my sacrifices. I can hear my wife crying, but why does it matter? She is a traitor, a heretic working against the love of the Great One. I'll feed her first. Together we will become the first apostles of Nagar and usher in a great age of delicious sickness and beautiful disease. Wait, I hear someone at the door. This is the last entry that can currently be deciphered. The rest appear to be covered in blood. Officials are attempting to uncover the rest, if any, in the house. What is known, though, is that at approximately 8:30 p.m. on July 19th, a witness heard screaming coming from Dr. Perditus's residence. After the police were contacted, they made entry to find him attempting to feed the severed arm of a diseased patient from Marygrove Hospital to his restrained wife. Officers attempted to subdue him, but he pulled a knife. In fear of their own lives, the officers shot and killed him. The diary was then discovered in his study, along with the partially eaten body of another patient. It is unknown at this time what caused him to fall so far. But hopefully the more we uncover in this diary, the more it'll point us in the right direction. The Statement of Alexander Rybnik, March 15th, 1937. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It wasn't about making history or to stand on the shoulders of giants. It was about knowledge and truth. I needed to know what happened to my grandfather. I needed to know what he'd discovered. I needed to see what he saw with his own eyes and come to an understanding. Oh, the mundanity and pointlessness of life finally sent me on my way. My friend, Captain Peasley, would take me on my quest. We travelled the ocean on the captain's fishing trawler, the Southern Crux. We were to make landfall at Cooktown, a coastal town in the Shire of Cook, Queensland, Australia. Now, before he died, my grandfather was a university lecturer who taught archaeology. I followed in his footsteps. In his will, he left me a key to a safety deposit box at his bank. To my surprise, the box contained several books on the occult and mysticism, and numerous maps. But the most significant items in the box were a pair of sketches and a curious black stone with a face of sorts carved into it. In my grandfather's letter, he stated that the drawings were inspired by strange dreams that had been plaguing him. I examined the sketches. A subterranean cavern of immense height was meticulously drawn on paper with black pencil. The centerpiece of this sketch were 2 rows of standing stones that ran parallel to one another. They were built from massive cyclopean rocks that were stacked in such a way that was reminiscent of Stonehenge. The image evoked fleeting thoughts of eldritch terror. Written on the backside of the drawing, "The gateway to the other side resides within the mountain." The second drawing was even more bizarre. I got the distinct impression that it was a cold and arid desert at night. The ground was fissured and littered with fields of mummified human remains. The focus of this image, however, was that of an enormous plateau which stood menacingly. On the surface of the plateau was also a collection of standing stones similar to the first. An indistinct shape stood on the edge of the plateau, an animal, I think. Written on the opposite side of the paper was a message. "The fabled plateau of Leng. Each and every single one of us will face this. It is inevitable." The stone carving came from a time when we knew very little and feared the primal world. A modern mind wouldn't find it difficult to visualize the world through the eyes of ancient man. The face on the stone, however, instilled an instinctive fear of the dark. My destination was a site held sacred by Australian Aborigines where humans feel unwanted, where they vanish without trace. A place that is rugged and foreboding, clouded in mystery and immersed in superstition. Black Mountain. Aboriginals refer to it as the Mountain of Death. Tunnels and caves honeycomb the area. The only living things on the mountain are giant spiders, pythons, and taipans. Thousands upon thousands of gigantic boulders strewn across the landscape make up the mountain, a treacherous, barren waste. Scientists have offered theories behind the origin of this peculiar mountain. A volcanic eruption, an upheaval during the Ice Age, an asteroid impact site. But none of these possibilities seem satisfactory. I stood at the bow of the ship, gazing at the continent that loomed on the horizon. My guide, Tommy, approached. "Oh, I think you're as mad as a bag of ferrets." "Tell me a tale," I said. Tommy leaned on the railing next to me. "My people have many beliefs on how the mountain came to be." "Go on," I said as I withdrew a pack of cigarettes from my shirt pocket. I offered Tommy a cigarette. He declined. I lit up as he began. "One such legend says, in the dreaming, the time when legends were born, there was a beautiful young woman whose skin shone like obsidian. 2 brothers were smitten by the woman. Both were determined to win her heart. Our attention was directed upwards towards the heavens. A faint ghostly band of red light materialized in the pre-dawn sky, directly above us. It was the Aurora Australis, the so-called Southern Lights. Tommy continued sharing his tale. To settle their differences, each brother set out to build a mountain of boulders. The brother with the highest mound would take the woman. Day after day, the brothers worked. Their piles of boulders grew taller and taller. Tommy paused and focused on the aurora. The glowing ribbons of red light spread across the dark sky as it brightened with intensity. The rippling lights continued to dance across the backdrop of luminous stars. Before the contest could be decided, a wild storm descended on the land. Boulders tumbled down and crushed both brothers. The woman died too. Do you believe it's haunted? They say her cries can be heard throughout the canyons and caves of the mountain. The place is cursed. At dusk, the evil of the place begins to reveal itself. You can hear it on the wind that blows in the endless caverns that run deep into the earth. It's a moaning wind that lures unsuspecting people to their doom. I grabbed my kit bag and withdrew the black stone with the carving on it. I presented it to Tommy. My grandfather found this in the mountain. Does it look familiar to you? Tommy stared at the stone a good while. He traced a finger over the lines that form the face. No, this does not resemble anything that I've ever seen. You say you found it in the mountain? Yes, in a subterranean chamber. It's very strange. Shortly afterwards, we docked at a fisherman's wharf just outside Cooktown. I booked a room at a nearby inn. Peasley would stay with the ship. During the day, we would go into town and stock up on supplies. While I was chatting with the innkeeper, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A person sitting on a bench directly across the inn. Underneath a street lamp was an elderly tribal man. He had a very distinct look that is seared into my memory. He had winter white hair and a beard that was long and unkempt. He was wearing a dusty old suit which seemed to be slightly frayed. I think the most unsettling thing about him was his gaze. Well, I wrote him off as a drunkard before checking in. Now, before departing to my room, I took one more glance at the old man, only to see that he was gone. Little did I know that this was a sign of things to come. And after a long voyage, sleep came easily. The following day, I sat down with one of the tribal elders at a local pub. I enjoyed a pleasant conversation over drink and food. He explained a belief among his people in the area. The tribal elder began telling me some of the beliefs of his people. The mountain is of important significance to the tribe. Kalkajaka is what we call it, the place of spears. The tribal elder paused to take a sip of his drink. His eyes scanned the room. He seemed suspicious of something. The mountain originated in the dream time with an evil medicine man who convened with wicked spirits from beyond. A young chief confronted him about this and was murdered by the medicine man. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. But it didn't stop there. The cruel medicine man went on to devour the flesh of the chief and drank his blood. The tribe became aware of this and chased the man out with burning vengeance in their hearts. He fled into the mountain, where he was then struck by a cleansing bolt of lightning. His body exploded and in turn charred the surrounding rocks. The tribal elder stopped again. I could see his eyes focused on someone behind me. He focused on me again and continued. It is a place that demands respect. But the white man has often disregarded the legends. In 1877, a courier was horseback riding, searching for a strayed calf, when he, the horse, and calf all disappeared. Several years later, a constable was hot on the heels of a wanted man. He was tracking the criminal through the bush at the base of the mountain. They both seemingly vanished into thin air. Other trackers followed the trail to a cave entrance, but came up completely empty-handed. Despite the unrelenting heat, I could feel a chill course through my body, like someone had walked over my grave. The tribal elder saw me shiver, and a grim look formed on his face. The disappearances have occurred ever since. Nearby cattle ranchers and their herds have gone without trace. Gold prospectors and cave explorers have all inexplicably disappeared into the ether. Human remains have been found in the vicinity of the mountain, their bodies cut to ribbons. But the most shocking thing about these grisly finds is that each of the individuals have had their skulls cracked open and their brains removed, possibly devoured. The tribal elder paused when he saw the color drain from my face. My grandfather was killed by someone in a very similar fashion while he was seeking treatment in Canberra. There are many predatory animals in Australia, but none of them are known to have these particular habits. Rumors of a killer stalking the countryside run rampant. The police have been working overtime on this. My heart sank into my stomach. But what about this phantom cat I've heard about? The tribal elder took another long sip from his drink before continuing. There have been rumblings of a large, mysterious black cat that has been sighted on the mountain. Maybe it's a surviving relative of Phylaceo carnifex, which was Australia's largest marsupial carnivore. This is an especially curious claim because there are no terrestrial cats on the continent. Domestic cats were introduced by colonists in 1804, and there are large wild cats that live in public zoos in the capital city, but none that live in the wilderness. Another pause between the two of us. We were both scanning the room now. I think I could confidently say we both felt like something was wrong. A shift in the conversation. I showed the black stone to the tribal elder, as well as the drawings created by my grandfather. He examined each one carefully and shook his head. A look of worry formed on his face. "How did your grandfather die?" the tribal elder asked. "He was murdered." "My condolences to you. May I ask how he was before he died?" "Oh, he looked like a man who was pursued. He was always looking over his shoulder. He shut himself away from the world." The tribal elder let out a sigh. Maybe he saw things he shouldn't have. Maybe he took things he shouldn't have touched. There was a long silence between the two of us as we looked down at our drinks. We were both pondering things. I happened to glance up and briefly caught sight of an old tribal man with a striking white beard and wild hair. He was dressed in a disheveled suit that looked like it came from another period, and he was fixated on me. He slowly raised a hand and pointed a finger directly at me. I blinked. The man was gone. The tribal elder broke the silence. Maybe it would be best to return the stone to its rightful place. I spent some time at the library. I'm not sure what to make of this. Excerpts from A Doomed Expedition. In 1850, a French explorer, Axel Guillemot, set out to explore Bag Mountain. The expedition consisted of 4 other Europeans, 2 Aboriginal guides, and 7 horses. They were never seen or heard from again. Only the remains of one of the guides was discovered. Their camp was found at the base of the mountain. It's believed they perished on the mountain. Subsequent search parties turned up nothing. There are photographs of each member of the expedition. The photographs were taken at a local church in Cooktown. One photograph in particular has put a strain on my nerves. It is one of the guides. An old man with a white head of hair and a grey beard. He was wearing a dark frock coat over light trousers and low-heel shoes. The name under the photograph, Clifford Bombat. Not much is known of his youth, but his skills in tracking and knowledge of Aboriginal language suggest a traditional upbringing. His skills in horse riding and marksmanship indicated extensive contact with colonial culture. He was serving as a native assistant in the police force at Cooktown, where his tasks were to assist in tracking of escaped convicts who were wanted by the authorities. He had a reputation as a superb tracker and a reliable and useful member of any travelling party. The mutilated remains of Clifford Bombat were discovered on the outskirts of their camp. Possible animal attack. The most significant wound was done to his head. The trek through the forest of eucalyptus trees was long and arduous. A thick fog bank swallowed the landscape. It suffocated the environment in its omnipresence. The looming mountain was a ghostly silhouette in a thick white veil. Fortunately, we were not far from the base of the mountain when the worst of it arrived. Maybe it was my imagination, but I could have sworn I saw a spectral shape moving in the fog, and a feeling of dread began to squeeze my heart. "I don't think we're alone," I whispered to Tom. "I know." Tommy reached into his rucksack and withdrew an M1 911 pistol. He looked at me. "You know how to use firearms?" I nodded. Tommy handed the gun over to me and withdrew a second handgun. He stuck it in his belt. "There are 2 huge pythons that live in the mountain, big enough to swallow a fully grown kangaroo." Tommy and I set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by tall grass. We would wait for the fog to dissipate before moving on, but in the meantime, we examined my grandfather's maps. It was unusually quiet. The surrounding area was completely mute, save for the sound of a gentle breeze. Can't help but feel eyes on both of us. In a dream, I was standing in a dark hallway at night. My grandfather's home in Poland. At the end of the hall was a door that was partially open. Dim orange light seeped through the minute openings. I approached the door with great trepidation in my heart. I summoned whatever courage I had and nudged the door open. A slow, painful creak sounded as the door gently swung open. It was my grandfather's study. A lone figure stood at the desk. It was my grandfather. A look of sorrow and regret was etched on his face. He reached into the desk and withdrew the black stone. He held it in his hand and extended his arm towards me. His lips were moving as though he was speaking, but no words came out. Something materialized behind my grandfather. An apparition. It was Clifford Bombat. His gaze was piercing my soul. And then something happened. His form began to change. He fell to the floor as a thrashing mass of shadows. A giant cat emerged from the dark. Its coat was inky black that refused to reflect any light. The beast was unlike any cat species I was familiar with. I could say its sleek body shape was similar to that of a cheetah, but its head was shaped like that of a jaguar with powerful jaws. I think its eyes were the worst. Both pupils were completely dilated. They were both ringed by luminescent irises that gave off a strange white light. They reminded me of a solar eclipse at totality. It bared its teeth, revealing rows of sharp teeth that dripped with saliva. A low, rumbling growl sounded from its throat. Its jaws unhinged and something erupted from its maw. Serpent. Tentacle. It was a muscular appendage that extruded towards me. It was the cat's esophagus and stomach turned inside out. At the edge of the gut sac was a bony lance of sorts. It punctured my skull and I collapsed to the floor. Several smaller tendrils emerged from the beast's throat and lashed out towards me. They entered the bleeding gash in my skull and began to pry it open. And then the room went black. I awoke to a late-night thunderstorm. I was gripping the stone with a face carved onto it. It was a tough scramble up the mound of gigantic black boulders that formed Black Mountain. We had the benefit of my grandfather's maps that showed us the path to take. He was very meticulous about detailing the location. The cave entrance was on the summit of the mountain. In order to access it, we had to get down on our bellies and push all the air out of our lungs in order to squeeze through a narrow gap. Once we got through the squeeze, we were able to stand upright. Next was a downward sloping tunnel. The sunlight lessened in here, so we readied our electric torches. The further we traversed the tunnel, the darker it became. At the end of the passage was a straight drop down. Tommy grabbed the climbing ropes from his rucksack and secured them, which would allow us to climb down the shaft. And then it happened. Heavy footfalls sounded behind us. A black silhouette knocked Tommy face first against the cavern wall. In the light from my electric torch, a massive feline was revealed. It swiped its claws at me just inches from my midsection. I could see pure animal rage in its eyes. It let out an ear-deafening roar that rippled through the passage. It was the phantom cat from my dream. But this was no dream. This was real. In a desperate panic, I withdrew the pistol from my kit bag and fired several times at the beast. The tunnel lit up from each shot. The deafening rounds punched holes into its hide. But the cat didn't even flinch. A guttural rumble sounded from deep within its throat. The cat opened its mouth, showing off rows of razor-sharp teeth. A muscular and flexible protuberance emerged from its throat, just like in my dream. It was the animal's stomach and esophagus, turning inside out and repurposed into a tentacle of sorts. A bony claw protruded from the very tip of the tentacle. The tentacle reeled back like a snake getting ready to strike. It launched towards me and struck the ground just inches from my feet. It did this several times, forcing me backward each time. I kept backing up in complete and utter terror until I found myself falling. Darkness. When I came to, I found myself at the bottom of the shaft. I was in a state of shock, agony, despair, horror. I detected movement coming from up above me. I grabbed my electric torch, which had survived the fall, and shone it upwards. A face was peering down at me. My grandfather! I cried out. I painfully retreated into the dark passage behind me, my heart noisily beating against my ribcage. My lungs felt like there was fire in them. I came to a complete stop at the end of the passage. My mind was trying to process everything that had happened. Primordial masonry stood in front of me, a wall composed of cyclopean stones. Perhaps it was a structure built by the ancients. It had to be. Oddly enough, a single block was missing. It was a way through, and I squeezed my way through silently, praying that the whole thing would not collapse onto me. I clumsily emerged into a chamber beyond the cyclopean wall. Spikes of pain shot through my back, reminding me of my great fall. I gasped in pain. My gasp had drawn the attention of something. Something big. Something hungry. The sound of something dragging through the loose rocks on the chamber floor. A massive creature slithered towards me. A cylindrical, limbless body moved into my light. Glistening scales, an arrow-shaped head, 2 yellow eyes fixed on me, and a large, fanged mouth. A giant python was moving towards me with predatory intent. I raised the pistol and fired twice into its head, putting it down instantly. The recoil of the pistol started making my hands feel numb. I instinctively turned around and saw a shadow figure standing back at the cyclopean wall. I shakily pointed the pistol and torch at the apparition, but to my dismay, the shape seemingly ate the light. It was darker than blackness. It didn't strike. It just stood there staring at me with creeping brutality. I started singing a lullaby to myself. When the blazing sun is gone, when he nothing shines upon, then you show your little light. Twinkle, twinkle, all the night. By this point, I was on the other side of madness, a descent to the inferno. Then the traveller in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. How could he see where to go if you did not twinkle so? Tears welled up in my eyes. My heart was overworking itself now. In the dead silence of the nameless ruins, I could hear hell's churn in my ears. My breath was stolen. I fled. After ploughing through an untold distance of Stygian depths, I found myself standing in an enormous cavern. The limits of the chamber were farther away than any eye could see. The inky darkness proved impenetrable from my flimsy torch. I halted my mad dash. It was freezing cold down here, a stark contrast to the surface climate. I could see the vapors of my breath in the light. My teeth began to chatter as I started to shiver. A twilight mist began to slowly drift up from the cavern floor. 2 rows of gigantic standing stones towered over me. It was a prehistoric monument of nebulous origin. It was much larger than Stonehenge. These were the ruins my grandfather had sketched on paper. I gazed up at the monoliths. Each of them had unidentifiable glyphs etched into them. What they were supposed to represent remains unknown. But horrible suggestions and primordial fear is what came to mind. A curious altar between the first 2 monoliths caught my attention. Dark stains discolored the top with rivulets on the sides. Movement behind me. I turned around only to come face to face with my grandfather. I found myself being lifted up off the ground. I kicked and thrashed helplessly. Next, I found myself being flung towards the altar. I landed on my back, having the wind knocked out of me a second time. I groggily got up and saw my grandfather pointing at me. By now, the twilight mist became waist-high, and the temperature in the cavern continued to drop. I realized my grandfather wasn't pointing at me, but at the altar behind me. I knew what had to be done. I nervously reached a hand into my kit bag and pulled out the black stone with a face carved onto it. I gently placed the rock onto the altar. I felt an electrical sensation travel throughout my body. There was a smell in the air like that of a thunderstorm. The mist started to dissipate, and the temperature began to warm. Then a loud eruption startled me, and everything went black. I remember flashes of consciousness, dark passages and cave tunnels, the sensation of being dragged, and a voice, Tommy's voice. "You're going to be okay, mate. Just a little further." I looked up and saw Tommy's face, but there was something different about him. His eyes. They reminded me of a total solar eclipse. And I faded out. When I finally came to, I found myself in the Cooktown Hospital. I know the truth about Black Mountain. I know about the dark and forbidden secrets that are hidden within. I put things right and re-established the balance, and I think I've been forgiven. However, the Mountain of Death, the place of the spear, will forever remain in my dreams.
For 7 consecutive years, no one has gone trick-or-treating in Bigelow County. In fact, no one in that rural, God-fearing little town celebrates Halloween at all. Under pressure from concerned parents, elderly residents, who make up the majority of the electorate, and the 4 churches, all of them some form of Protestantism, well, the October holiday is banned. Has been since 2012. No trick-or-treating, no costume parties, no jack-o'-lanterns, neither the Kmart nor Target sells costumes at any time of the year or even the seasonal bundles of mini chocolate bars. And you have to drive 2.5 hours into Milton Valley if you want to see an R-rated film playing in theaters. Despite the gripes of uninformed teenagers and former residents, the mayor had not made the decision nor wields any power to reverse it. The decision to bar Halloween was instead rendered by the 5 city council members, Mrs. Esther Calhoun, Mrs. Linda Batali, Mr. Ian Finn, Mr. Ronald Womack, and Mr. Frank Albrecht. Albrecht, unlike the others, is not of Bigelow County. He was born in the city and had moved his family into the small town to set up his businesses, a towing company, a tire shop, and a home appliance outlet. He doesn't feel the same religious fervor over the supposedly satanic nature of Halloween, or care about its pagan roots. Truthfully, if he actually spent time to think on it, he would probably be an atheist. But, well, those reactionary Bible thumpers are not only his constituents, but also his customers. So when it came time to vote on the matter, he didn't have to think twice. Naturally, October 31st of this year starts out as a non-event for Albrecht. The morning and afternoon passing him by without him ever remarking at the date. Just another Thursday. In the evening, about 8 o'clock, he settled in his study, poring over sales reports on his desk with a mug of black coffee steaming by his elbow. He's tried reaching his son, Felix, who runs his truck stop in Coldwater, 5 times on his cell, each time in vain. He's about to attempt a 6th call when he's interrupted by the doorbell. It rings feverishly, a volley of 6 or 7 rapid dings, as though being pressed by an impetuous child. Placing the phone down beside his desktop monitor, Albrecht eases himself vertical and shuffles out of his study. Another rapid volley of 8 hasty rings doesn't hurry his pace, but deepens the creases on his brow, putting his teeth on edge. Through the peephole, he can see a small person. Not a toddler as such, but likely a preteen boy, maybe 11 or so, wearing a black polyester cape and cowl. Beneath the cowl, Albrecht can make out an orange plastic mask. When he opens the door, he can see the mask is of a jack-o'-lantern face, similar to the one his son wore for Halloween decades ago, well, when they still lived in the city. He studies the costumed figure on his front stoop for a beat before scanning the vast cul-de-sac behind him, looking for an adult. For a fleeting moment, it feels as though the 2 of them are the last living souls on Earth. "Hey there, kiddo," he addresses the figure, a forced laugh in his voice. He's standing in the egress before this would-be trick-or-treater, wearing a pair of khakis and a button-down, his reading glasses still perched on the bridge of his nose. No Halloween decorations of any kind anywhere near his impressive property. "Where's your parent, little guy? You know, your guardian?" The masked trick-or-treater says nothing. Instead, he just stares up at Albrecht, the eye holes of his mask filled with shadow. Annoyed, Albrecht sighs through his nose. "Look, kid," he says emphatically, "I don't have any goodies for you, okay? I'm not doing Halloween. Nobody around here is, okay? So when your mother or whoever comes by to get you, tell them to take it down the road." With that, he shuts the door on the masked trick-or-treater's face. Slightly befuddled, he makes his way back to his study, needing to get a hold of his son more than ever. And then, ding-dong, 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 ding-dong. His shoulders hunched, Albrecht gives out a sibilant grunt before spinning on his heel and charging the door. "Hey!" he shouts, finding the same masked trick-or-treater waiting on his stoop. "What's your problem? Didn't you hear me the first time? You speak English or what?" Like before, the masked trick-or-treater stares up darkly at Albrecht, a taciturn eeriness radiating from behind the plastic pumpkin face. That feeling of loneliness settles over Albrecht again, lingering this time, the two of them standing in an island of weak light. Albrecht then wrinkles his nose, finding a fetid, metallic odour in the air. Perhaps this child's homeless, he thinks. He also realizes for the first time that the masked trick-or-treater is holding a pillowcase, presumably his sack of candy, which looks nearly full. Who would have given this kid candy? He asks himself. Though, given the smell, it might not be anything sweet creating that round bulge at the bottom of the bag. "All right, listen to me, son," says Albrecht, bending a knee, staring directly into the dark eye holes in the orange mask. "This is private property, got it? And what you're doing isn't allowed in this county. Now, either go get your guardian or wander back where you came from. Otherwise, I'm calling the police." Again, he shuts the front door on the trick-or-treater, slamming it for emphasis. His mood sufficiently soured, Albrecht marches back into his study, scooping up his cell phone and checking his messages. Still nothing. No texts or calls from Felix. More agitated than concerned, he hisses out a triplet of curses, then begins chewing his bottom lip. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Albrecht can feel the back of his neck turn red at the sound. He then looks down to his phone, his thumb searching the keypad. Cooling off a little, thinking himself a real goon for calling the cops on some kid in a Halloween get-up, he opts instead to dial the number for Child Protective Services. Before completing the call, he sits down, takes a sip from his coffee, now cold, and decides to wait it out, hoping like hell someone shows up to claim the kid. Sitting slumped in his office for minutes on end, the incessant doorbelling informs Albrecht the child has not disappeared. He knows it would be better to watch him through his den window, but now in the sanctuary of his study, he can't bear face that masked trick-or-treater again. The thought of the unsettling chill in the kid's stare spreading goose flesh up his forearm. Having waited the better part of an hour, the first tremors of a headache palpable in his temples, Albrecht unlocks his phone and sends the call to CPS. He sits there, listening to the phone ring in his hand, before bringing it to his ear, having heard a female voice charm through the speaker. Hi there," he intentionally stammers. "Is this CPS?" "Yes, sir. May I ask where you're calling from?" Albrecht rises to his feet, making his glacial walk back to the front door. "Yeah, I'm at 5748 Chestnut Circle in Bigelow County. Look, there's this kid on my stoop, and he's just been standing there for an hour. I think he might be lost or homeless or something." "I see, sir. Do you know the name and address of the child?" "No. You see, that's the thing. He won't talk to me." Albrecht inches closer to the door. Reticently, he peers through the peephole, finding the masked trick-or-treater still standing there, reaching up to ring the doorbell for the 1,000th time. He's just standing in front of my door and ringing the bell. He's dressed up for Halloween, but he won't leave, even after I'd said I wasn't giving out candy. Another agonizing stream of doorbell rings. "Okay, sir. Perhaps you can try again and see if you can get the child's name and address." Nodding his head, Albrecht begins reaching for the doorknob, but then, confused, bites into his bottom lip. "You've got my address?" he then says, more as a question than a statement. "Yes, sir, but if there's an issue, we can send someone to check up on him tomorrow morning at his place of residence." "What, you're not going to send someone to pick him up now?" He can hear his voice jumping an octave, feeling as though marooned on a desert island and watching a freighter pass by in the distance. "Well, I'm afraid, sir, our closest social worker lives about 300 kilometers out of Bigelow County. Believe me, we will call this person tonight,
so they know to leave the next morning. So, if you're concerned about this child for the night, I suggest either phoning your local police station or getting the number for his legal guardian." "Okay, got it," mutters Albrecht, exhaling wetly through his nostrils. He hangs up, then immediately dials the sheriff's office. "Sheriff's office, Deputy Buckley speaking." "Hi, Ted. It's Frank Albrecht." "Hey, Councilman. How's that new truck stop in Coldwater? Felix finding it okay?" "Fine, yeah. Look, Ted, I got this kid on my stoop. About age 10 or 11, I think. He's been there about an hour and he won't leave." "You recognize the kid there, Frank?" No. See, he's wearing a mask. Like a Halloween get-up there, yeah?" Yeah, exactly." "He's causing mischief?" "No, not really. He just keeps ringing my doorbell and won't leave. I've asked him several times." "Okay, Councilman. Have you spoken to his adult? I mean, they should know there's no Halloweening around these parts." "Yeah, that's the thing. He seems to be unaccompanied. I've been looking around and waiting for an hour, and there's nobody here with him." "Okay, so? Well, so I was hoping that you or the sheriff could come by and pick him up." "Yeah, I see, Councilman. Well, the thing is, Sheriff and I are pretty busy." Hearing this, Albrecht rolls his eyes. These cops have the cushiest job in one of the smallest, safest towns in the country, but are always making excuses to sit on their lazy asses. "Could you possibly try and speak to the young man again? Find out his name, his address. Perhaps get a number to call his folks." "I've already been speaking with him, Ted. That's why I'm calling you guys." "I understand, Counselor, but doesn't it seem a bit excessive to send a prowler over there for one kid in a costume?" "It does, don't it? Well, I'll stay on the line, but why don't you try speaking to the kid again? See if he's willing to talk with you now. I mean, you don't feel like you're in any kind of danger, do you?" Despite the prickled hairs on his neck and the lump forming in his throat, Albrecht responds with a no. He doesn't feel like he's in any kind of danger. At least, logically, he doesn't. Logically, he isn't. He couldn't be. Exhaling deeply from his chest, Albrecht turns the brass knob. "Son," he addresses the masked trick-or-treater, who's staring back at Albrecht with his head tilted to the side, as though not recognizing Albrecht as a human. "What's your name?" he asks, holding his phone to his chest. The dark, tilted stare holds. "You speak English?" Albrecht asks, sincere this time. Silence. Utter quiet around them, save for the chirping crickets and rustle of the wind. "Do you live around here?" He tries again, his inability to stir a response from the costume figure reminiscent of a dream about quicksand. His heart has started firing hard in his chest. "See, I told you he won't talk to me," Albrecht says into the phone. "I can understand that, Counselor," the deputy replies. "Why don't you hand him over the phone? Let me speak to him." That sounds just right to Albrecht. Taking a knee, so to be high level with the visitor, Albrecht holds out the phone. The masked trick-or-treater doesn't bite. "The police are on the other end," Albrecht says, brandishing the phone before the sunken eyes behind the cheap orange synthetic. "Take it. They want to speak with you." Nothing. Near his wit's end and on the verge of strangling the little twerp, Albrecht leans forward, extending his arm full length to hold the phone next to the visitor's face. When he does, the visitor grasps his arm, catching hold at lightning speed, squeezing hard, the phone clattering down the concrete steps. Being a small boy, his fingers aren't long enough to wrap around Albrecht's wrist, but his grip stings like a cobra bite. Jarring on the spot, Albrecht feels his entire body tingle hotly,
his ears ringing like he's been kicked in the head, feeling like he's having a heart attack. His eyes squelch closed. Albrecht feels a sudden rush of vertigo and a sensation of being hauled to his feet. When he opens his eyes, he blinks, and blinks again, hoping, praying that he can will what's before him from existence. The masked trick-or-treater has disappeared, replaced by a towering 7-foot obscenity. The polyester cape and cowl have transformed into a black cloak of thick, heavy wool. The head under the sagging hood, a carved pumpkin, its jagged outlines consumed by its roaring inner fire, the face morphing as the flames lick and blacken the vegetal meat. Albrecht looks down at his arm, finding in the obscenity's cadaverous claw enveloping his wrist, audibly crushing the bones. The goose flesh on his forearm is now overcome with boiling, spreading warts. He pulls back hard, only for the creature to release him, sending him teetering backward before landing hard on his buttocks. Inside his home, it's worse. So much worse. The heat is unbearable, humid and unbreathable like jungle mist. The walls move, slither, made up now of anaconda and python instead of plaster, wood, brick or stone. Their scales shine with menace, their slick, corpulent bodies writhing, pulsating, forming a vertical barrier. Around him, perched on the furniture, are huddled manifestations of the most unspeakable grotesquerie. Horns, pincers, grey puckered skin, dying eyes, vast yawning maws. Nightmares. Albrecht can't be sure if he's in hell or he's lost his mind. Nursing his obliterated wrist, Albrecht looks up and sees the 7-foot obscenity has advanced into what was once his home. The visitor has now made its final transformation. Pumpkin meat was receded into blackened ribs about the face, revealing a charred death mask with a skeletal smile, the teeth yellow and caked with shreds of cooked flesh. The only remnants of the fire now burn behind the visitor's peeled, staring eyes. Met by that odor from before, Albrecht heaves, feeling deathly ill. It has grown intolerably rancid, fecal and coppery. A swarm of insects, from out of nowhere, buzz maddeningly around the room, hovering tellingly close to the sack held in the visitor's grip. That round bulge is still there, though now the sack is soaked through wet with dripping crimson. In excruciating torment, Albrecht plasters his one good hand to his left ear, burrowing the right side of his head into his shoulder, the doorbell echoing like an alarm in his skull. Then, like a song-changing note, the sound morphs, splintering into syllables of a language Albrecht doesn't recognize. A language more rasp than vowel, more growl than consonant. Then, as though he's spoken it his whole life, the meaning of the guttural tongue comes clear to his mind. You do not know. You do not understand the significance of this autumn night. In your ill hubris and folly, you believe you can embargo its cathartic rituals to serve your own sense of normalcy, that you can bar it from your community for the sanctity of your souls. You believe in utter ignorance that tonight is when you invite the fallen angel of your God, Yahweh, into your commune. No. Tonight, as it has been for thousands of years, is the night you mortals give sacrifice to the titans of your harvest, to the old ones who once roamed this planet with unchallenged authority, to sponsor our brief revival into the material world, to exercise our lingering minions, your most carnal and macabre desires, from your frail flesh. But as you have broken this promise, here in this settlement, Bigelow County, we seek to take the sacrifice owed us, The same sacrifice as was taken by force before this annual treaty of Halloween was ever made. We take what was once yours, what you most cherish. Tears in his eyes, his boils bursting with pus, Albrecht witnesses the 7-foot visitor reaching into the blood-drenched sack. The smell of rotten blood embedding itself in his sinuses. He observes the visitor's corpse-like arm pulling something out, the position of its wrist indicating a grasp on some kind of hook or handle, as if the visitor is unearthing a turnip by its stem, or pulling something up by its hair. "No," cries Albrecht, choked by the image of his worst possible fear. No, it can't be, you couldn't, it can't be." Albrecht's scream pierces the night air, rousing the entire cul-de-sac. At 9:24 p.m., councilwoman and retired school principal Esther Calhoun is getting ready for bed. In the bathroom, she pulls out her dentures, placing them into a glass of disinfectant on the countertop next to the sink. In the other room, her husband is snoring. In her slippers and silk nightgown, she pads down the hall, about to turn off the last house lights, when she's startled by the doorbell, ringing incessantly.
No matter what you see in the coming months, regardless of how convincing it might seem, just know that I didn't want to die. I'm going to take all possible steps to prevent my predetermined demise, but, well, if I don't make it, I need at least someone to know what really happened to me. I'm not, nor have I ever been, a remarkable person. I've never been terrible, but never did great deeds either. To put it bluntly, ever since I left high school, I found my place in eternal mediocrity. Honestly, being perfectly average didn't bother me much while growing up. Life was decent. I didn't struggle, and it felt like I had an overabundance of time to improve myself. But once I entered my 30s, the time I'd wasted started to wear on my confidence, and a bout of anxiety invaded my otherwise peaceful existence. In order to make myself feel better, I decided to look through my old home videos, figuring that maybe I could get an inkling as to where I lost my passion for living. I dug through my parents' basement while they were at the market to look for the long-since-forgotten memories. We hadn't filmed anything since the death of VHS tapes back in the early 2000s, but, well, with some luck, the infinite procrastination abilities possessed by my father meant that both the tapes and the player still waited idly by in the dust-covered boxes. After a long search, and a couple of coughing fits from the dust clouds, I found a box marked Home Videos. The box was full to the brim with old tapes, and the player itself. It was far more than I ever remembered filming, but it had already started to satisfy my hunger for nostalgia. I felt confident that I'd find at least some inspiration and drive within the films. So, with little hesitation, I eagerly brought them home to my one-bedroom apartment and connected the old player, using a ton of adapters to make it fit modern televisions. I picked up the first tape, labeled Adam Davis Highlights 1985 to 2006, and inserted it into the player. Though some of the footage was more than 3 decades old at that point, the tape itself was rather new, or at least as new as VHS tapes could possibly be. It meant that someone had transferred the footage to a newer tape to preserve the film, probably my mother. It had to be rewound, and as it did, I poured myself a glass of cheap whiskey while listening to the loud whirring sound of the tape being dragged back to its beginning. And then I hit play. A poorly focused picture came to view, partially covered by the date, reading January 5th, 1985. It was myself as a baby, barely out from the womb, and my mother was the person behind the camera. She cooed and made funny hand gestures to get me to smile, which I diligently did as she laughed in joy at her wrinkly little creation. I sat through half an hour of footage, watching myself grow up, and though I had no recollection of these events, it felt nice to see that I once lived a carefree life of joy and exploration. Everything felt amazing, and before I knew it, Christmas of 1989 had rolled around, one of my very first happy memories. 4 years old and wearing an oversized Santa hat, I sat on our carpeted floor and fiddled with a colorfully wrapped Christmas gift. Cheerful music played in the background, and a dog ran around, excited by the torn wrapping paper littering the floor. The dog eventually ran over to my young self and started to playfully pull on my present while I attempted to push it away, all the while laughing my heart out. Oh, it was a wonderful scene to behold, and though I had a vague memory of that day, my first Christmas to remember, I had absolutely no recollection of ever owning a dog. Oh, don't get me wrong, I love dogs. In fact, I always wanted one, but due to horrible allergies that developed during my childhood, my parents always kept me away from the furry and lovable creatures. My first thought was that the dog belonged to some other family member, but as the years went by, the dog proved a faithful companion and made several appearances on the tape. Though the footage was clearly real, and I was the center of it, I couldn't for the life of me remember the dog. He, Doug, followed me around until the age of 12, when it suddenly stopped showing up on the tape. Presumably passed away from old age, but he wasn't discussed any further in any of the other clips. He kept watching through my primary school years, then high school, and finally college. Everything was exactly how I remembered it. Every minute detail matching my memory of life. Everything except for the dog. As the tape neared its end, the date read October 7th, 2006. I was filming myself out with some colleagues from my part-time job. We were just having a few drinks after work, and though it wasn't a particularly exciting evening, I remember feeling so happy, absolutely certain of my place in the world. Everyone was laughing, and we seemed to have a genuinely great time. The evening went on, and my memory turned hazy while the footage turned more sloppy. As it often goes with an overabundance of alcohol, there were holes in my memory from that night. The screen cut to black for a few seconds, and once the picture returned, someone was filming me from the other side of the bar. Whoever held the camera, they weren't one of my friends, nor did I seem to pay them any attention. On the footage, I still sat with a couple of my colleagues at the table, just finishing up my final beer before getting up to pay the tab. As we left the bar, the cameraman followed us, keeping his distance. We still didn't acknowledge his presence. Unbeknownst to us, a stranger had gotten hold of my camera, and in my drunken state I never realized. He kept following us down the street as my friends dropped me off into a taxi. The clip ended, and the screen cut to black for a full minute. I wondered if the tape had reached its end, but the timer kept counting up. Once the picture returned, I was met by a dark scene. The camera was pointed towards a dimly lit road and slowly panned along the street. Small pieces of debris and chunks of cloth littered the road, all accompanied by a vague crackling sound in the distance. Before long, the picture showed a mangled car wreck partially on fire. The cameraman moved closer to the wreck. I gasped in shock as I saw the severity of the crash. The driver's head had been smashed beyond recognition by the steering wheel. He'd suffered a quick, unexpected death. But the passenger, I, was still alive. It zoomed in on my mangled body as I desperately tried to get free from my seat, but I was stuck under twisted metal, and my broken legs had been caught within it. The fire spread slowly at first, and the cameraman stood idly by watching as it reached my body. Still, I didn't notice anyone filming me. The fire started to spread quicker, and I screamed in agony as it climbed up my body towards my face, my clothes fusing to my skin and my face charring from the heat. After the fire had burned away most of my skin, killing each of the nerve endings, I stopped screaming, though I never stopped moving. Not until my muscles had finally stopped functioning did I finally go quiet. I'm not sure how long the scene lasted, nor do I care to go back and check. I sat frozen in fear as I listened to each second of my pleading screams until the moment I fell silent and finally died. My life had ended. On camera, the 7th of October, 2006. That was just the end of the first tape. I sat speechless trying to figure out if I'd fallen victim to some sick prank, or if the footage showed an alternate version of myself that never made it out of college. I dug out another tape and read the title. Adam Davis, Highlights, 1985 to 2002. With extreme trepidation, I removed the first tape and inserted the second into the player. Be it morbid curiosity or a desperate need to find answers, I decided to watch another. The footage was almost identical to the first tape, but no dog ever showed up in the film. Instead, the only notable change to my life was the fact that my grandfather had died in 1999 instead of 1993, and the color of my first car changed from black to red. I kept forwarding to the very end of the tape, only watching bits of clips along the way. Once at the end, the day was dated November 15th, 2002. It was a party, and though too young to legally drink, it hadn't stopped me from enjoying the occasional house party. I remember leaving the place around midnight after being rejected by my crush and walked the 2-mile journey home alone in the dark. As I walked, someone followed me in the distance, filming me without my knowledge, just as with the first tape. I crossed the street and took a shortcut through an alleyway and was immediately cut off by a hooded figure. The scene was filmed from too far away to hear what was happening, but the hooded person pulled a gun, and I lifted my hands up in response and immediately froze. Whether it was supposed to be a robbery or a hostage situation, I didn't know. I just kept holding my hands up high while the robber erratically waved the gun around. Before I could defuse the situation, the gun went off and hit me point blank in the throat. I fell to the ground, clutching my throat. While I lay there, desperately trying to slow down the bleeding, the cameraman approached me with slow, patient steps. This time I noticed the stranger approaching, and I stared into the camera as I gasped for air, unable to call out for help. It took me less than a minute to bleed to death, the camera continuously getting closer to my panicked face until the moment I took my last gargled breath. And then it cut to black. In 2002, I died alone on the street, never knowing why. The same scene kept repeating itself for each of the recordings. Every time, small details were changed, memories that didn't make sense, things that didn't happen, but they always ended with my untimely death. On September 29, 2004, I drowned as my car plunged into the river. The windows didn't open, and I couldn't break through the windshield. On January 13, 2005, I fell off a cliff and broke my legs while hiking alone in a neighboring city. The fall caused an open fracture which severed one of my arteries, and it took me a full hour to bleed out as I desperately tried to crawl for help. 5 deaths, each filmed by a stranger, never offering a helping hand, never speaking a single word. I returned to my parents' place with the box of tapes and demanded to know what the hell was going on. They took one glance at them and denied knowing about their existence. Despite my father's extreme laziness, he'd long since gotten around to digitalizing the footage, putting it on a hard drive and storing it in a fireproof safe. They showed me the home videos they'd made, and everything appeared just as I remembered it, with no horrific death at the end. The tapes had to have been put in the basement recently, as a flood had destroyed most of the stuff stored there only a year before when I was abroad. Whoever put the videos there, it wasn't my father. Following the conversation with my parents, my first instinct was to throw the tapes in a fiery pit and forget they'd ever existed. But saner thoughts prevailed. I had to talk to the police, to figure out who had made them and, more importantly, how. I loaded them into my car, checking over each of the titles once more, when I noticed one marked Highlights, 1985 to 2020. I stopped dead in my tracks and just stared at the tape in my hand. It was bizarre enough to hold a cassette dated in the future, but the fact that I already knew its ending horrified me even further. After what felt like an eternity of contemplation, I decided to see what the tape had to offer. A glimpse into my near future, for better or for worse. If it revealed any details, maybe I'd get the chance to escape whatever fate had in store for me. I stared intently at each memory depicted on the television screen, desperate to look for any deviations from my own memory. If I was lucky, it was another reality altogether. But no matter how hard I tried to look for any discrepancies, it perfectly matched my life as I knew it. Once the tape got to December 2019, I took a deep breath and paused the video for a moment. Maybe I should have let the police deal with it. If fate is predetermined, then how could I even prevent it? But I had to know what would happen to me. The urge was irresistible. I hit play once more. The date read December 17th, 2019, and the picture revealed a cold, grey hospital room. I was there, holding my unconscious mother's hand as she took her last breath and fell eerily silent, as if her presence had left the world. The doctor in the room assured me she hadn't felt any pain, that she was at peace, but the actual cause of her death never came up. Whoever filmed it didn't seem to take part in the interaction. Just like with the other clips, the stranger simply observed us, unnoticed by anyone actually in the room. The clip ended rather abruptly, cutting to black, remaining empty for a full minute. Once it faded back in, the date read January 24th, 2020. I saw myself sitting in what looked like a dirty motel room, one I couldn't recognize. I kept my hands folded over my lap as I sat on the edge of the bed. I was clearly distressed and paid little notice to the cameraman in the room. It went on like that for a couple of minutes, me muttering some incomprehensible panic sentences and the camera remaining focused on my hands. Suddenly, I lifted my head towards the cameraman with pleading eyes. "Please, I don't want to do this. Don't make me do this. I don't want to. I don't want to," I said with a trembling voice. The cameraman remained silent, but the look on my face said enough. I was horrified, and it was clear that whoever filmed me was also coercing me to do something against my will. I lifted my hands up from my lap to reveal a knife. Just the run-of-the-mill pocket knife, but threatening nonetheless. My hands shook as I once more begged for mercy. "I don't want to. Please, don't make me do this." Then I directed my attention to the knife, and without hesitating any further, I plunged it into my wrist, dragging it up along my arm towards my elbow as I winced in agony. I sat motionless on the bed as viscous blood poured from the cut, the camera keeping its focus on me as the life slowly drained from my body. Minutes passed, and I dropped dead on the floor, letting out a final breath before succumbing to blood loss. The tape ended with the familiar jagged lines and grey screen, with a high-pitched, monotonous beat the only thing left to keep me company. Following the last tape, I headed straight to the police station and handed over the tapes. They were hesitant at first, but quickly came around when they saw the footage. Of course, their explanation was more within the realm of logical possibilities, that someone had altered the footage, created a doctored video. Though they did take it seriously as a threat to my life, and swore they'd keep me safe while they looked into it. Unfortunately, without a perpetrator, it would be hard to do anything. I was left with little choice but to hide in my home with all the doors locked and every window covered up. After getting home, I sat myself down by the phone and waited for the police to call me with any updates, though I knew if anything did come up, it would take days, if not weeks. It's possible that it is another reality, and that'll be fine. Maybe it is just a sick prank and not someone that can literally see into the future. Those are all just hopeless thoughts, because an hour ago I received a phone call from my dad. He told me that my mum collapsed in the bathroom and that they're taking her to the hospital. He keeps reassuring me that she'll be fine, but I know better. In a few weeks, my mum will be dead, and then shortly after, I'll follow.
And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favour of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.